I call this meeting of the Monomoy Regional School Committee to order at 6:31. And the first item of business is the approval of the meeting minutes. Are there any corrections? The motion?
I move we accept the minutes.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, is there any public comment?
Good evening, members of the school committee and Dr. Carpenter. My name is Sherry Armstrong, and I stand before you as the president of the Monomoy Regional Education Association. It is a pleasure to be here this evening to share with you how fabulous the opening days of our Monomoy Regional Schools have been. Students returned to spotless buildings thanks to the hard work and dedication of our custodians who worked tirelessly throughout the hot summer months. Their efforts are reflected in the gleaming floors and sparkling surfaces around us. Our cafeteria staffs create and offer a variety of healthy and nutritious breakfasts and lunches, providing us all with delicious choices. Our administrative assistants prepare a wealth of paperwork and complete other important tasks necessary for the opening day of school and the days that follow. Our school nurses are readily available to meet the medical needs of our students, and our school counselors provide the social and emotional guidance that supports student achievement and social emotional wellness. And our district's teachers and instructional assistants set the stage for an exciting year of learning. Each of our schools offers a variety of extracurricular activities, many of which are available to students because educators and staff are willing to volunteer their time both before and beyond the school day, whether in tutoring, chaperoning events, or arranging educational travel. We also know that we have welcomed many new students to our Monomoy family as our reputation for academic achievement and positive school culture continues to grow. The efforts of everyone in this room, including all of you, account for this success. Yet we are working without new contracts. To us, this conveys a lack of respect and appreciation for our professionalism, our dedication, and our contributions. At this time, we are doing our best to ensure our Monomoy schools remain the best. But we cannot continue to do this without your support. So I leave you with this thought. Success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success.
Okay, is there anyone else?
I'm not finished.
Oh.
Thank you for your time.
Anyone else have anything to add, to say? Well, I started off a little bit early with the 5-minute, but I do want to welcome Leah, our new administrative assistant, to guide me, give me hints, whisper in my ear, and type up the notes, take the notes, and welcome. Glad to have you. Okay. All right, the next thing on the agenda are recognitions, and I think we have copies of those in our folder. Is that
Yeah.
true, or is that a lie?
So it's just on the agenda, there's a list of 5 of them, and then I have one to add. I would like to thank Pat Freeland from the Angels Fund for providing 25 backpacks for students who might need them. 7th graders were able to, had a visitor from South Carolina, Celia Powers, who donated school supplies, pens, pencils, paper, crayons. Ben Nickerson and the Masons donated school supplies, also to help get our students off to a great start. And then we had Cape Cod Blue Economy Project's donation of $150 American Express gift card for the Monomoy Regional Middle School for their participation in helping complete the Career Intentions and Perceptions Survey. And we have a donation from the Friends of Pleasant Bay. There's 2018 grant for Monomoy Regional Middle School teachers, Catherine Kane, in the amount of $1,778, Julia Randall in the amount of $5,600, and to Melinda Forrest in the amount of $6,800. I would also like to really thank on the first day of the school year, or when the teachers came back, they had, at Chatham Elementary School, there was a trip that the teachers took. It was a teacher's field trip to go visit a number of students. It's like, I feel like, it's like we've got the hot mic. There were a number of students that they were able to stop at their houses and share some greetings and just welcoming the students to show up at school in a couple days, but also to drop off some school supplies. So they surprised a number of their students, and had a nice lunch afterwards at New England Pizza in Chatham. So it was a cute experience, and I was glad to be invited along, even if some parents weren't there and we had to just take pictures on their front doorstep, let's say. Not to mention anyone here. Lastly, I want to just acknowledge a change that we've had at the assistant principal level at the high school. Mike Martin has been our grade 8, grade 9 assistant principal for the last few years, and Mike has taken a position at another school, and it was challenging transition because it was, we'll call it very late in the season. Luckily, in many ways, we have a very qualified person in-house who has been seeking her administrative certification. So, so we actually put out a posting for an interim assistant principal, and you'd think at the tail end of the summer there would be a lot of people applying, but we had 23 applicants for the position. There was a committee of 3 parents, a student, teacher, Jamie Girolamo, the athletics director, and one of the central office administrators, and Bill Burkett, the principal. And they interviewed 4 applicants from that field of 23, including 1 in-house candidate. The committee unanimously moved forward Jen Police, who was our in-house candidate. Jen has been the head of our guidance department at the high school for the last couple of years, and has just been, I think, exceptional in her role there. So Jen started formally last Monday in the role of assistant principal. Actually, no, this Monday. How time flies. So Jen, Jen is ending her first week now as assistant principal at high school, and we're currently posting and getting ready to interview for guidance guidance counselor at the high school. Yeah, the nice thing with Jen, being here is that she sent out an email to her, her student caseload. You can imagine the families that are most anxious are those that have seniors, and she'll be working with those students and their families. So it'll be nice to at least have her here to make sure that that they get good quality support, and I know we'll be well served with Jen in that assistant principal role. That's it for the recognitions.
Building project financing? Dawn? Hey, oh.
In talking to some individuals at the Massachusetts School Building Authority a few weeks ago, basically we almost talked about an overview of the project for them because they have some different people working on our audit. So I thought tonight would be a good point also just to give you an overview of where we all started with the project, because there's some new people on the committee, and obviously we've been doing this for quite a while. So September 14th of 2011, a feasibility study was authorized by the school committee to talk about merging Chatham and Harwich, and also about the high school situation. July of 2012, the school committee authorized school bonds to be issued in order to construct the new high school. In August of 2012, Chatham and Harwich approved the issuance of bonds as well. February of 13, we started construction. September of 14, students and staff started the school year at the new high school. May of 2018, we put the project in what we call a closeout phase. We submitted everything to MSBA to do the final audit of our project. In October of 18, October 30th, in fact, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which I'll refer to as MSBA when I get to my other talks, that is the day that they expect to complete the audit from the information we submitted in May, and provide us with information pertaining to our estimated grant. We will have an opportunity to discuss and review the audit, and whatever we want to make for comments or questions, we have to do that within, before the October 30th timeframe for them to get their final report. So tonight what I'd like to do is mainly give you an overview of the whole project. In other words, from the financing standpoint, the project budgets, the source of funds. In other words, where do we get the money to actually build the high school? And then I also want to touch on the committees that were involved with this whole project. There were a number of subcommittees, but they were all part of the main committees that we had. So there was 3 major committees that were basically had some big roles in this whole project. And I think it's important for everyone to understand what their role was and how we got to where we are now. And then I want to touch briefly on the financing transactions. I'm not going to go over them in detail because there's about 7 pages worth of dates and activities pertaining to everything we did from a financing standpoint. But what I'm going to do is go over the process of how we got to bond anticipation notes, as we call them, and also the bonding of the project. Then I want to give you an overview of the status of the MSBA audit, and then finally talk about what the people are mainly interested in, at least from the town meeting we had a couple weeks ago, is where's the debt service going to be at this point because of the project. So my first part is just to deal with the project budgets. And the original budget of July in 2012, That started out as $64.7 million that was approved by the school committee. Then the towns voted on it to exclude that from Proposition 2.5 from a tax standpoint. The construction bid came in July of 2013, and the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA, approved everything for $59.5 million. So in a sense, it's a cost reduction from what the original authorization was of over $5 million. Then a bond was authorized in November of 12 by the town bond council. And what that meant was that we could issue up to $36 million in bonds for a 30-year time frame, based on the fact that MSBA had indicated, based on the scope of the project, the efficiencies that were going to be in the facility, that we would get an estimated grant of about 51% of our costs. So at this point, I'd like to have you look at the budget information that was part of your packet, which is this form. And I just want to give you a quick overview of the dollars. As you can see, it's a summary, and these codes and categories that are on this budget information are basically MSBA's requirement for us to be able to keep track of all budgets, costs, expenses through their own coding system. It's similar to what you already see when you see the Monomoy reports. They have their own systems. So there's several accounts here, and basically it covered our feasibility study, the legal fees, the owner's project manager, the architect and engineering firm, the construction company, and also our category for other costs, and what we call FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Those are the major categories, but in total, there's 78 sub-accounts that we had to deal with for keeping track of everything here. The first column in this report was the original funding agreement that was created by MSBA. As you can see, it totaled up to $64.7. The next column is the bid, when we had the bids for construction, and that totaled up to $59,451, which is $5.2 million reduction. The next column is called the revised budget, because as you can see in both the project funding agreement and the construction bid agreement, there was a construction contingency of $2.5 million, and there was an owner contingency of $500,000. What those funds are for is when you go through the process and you need to revise budgets, dollars are being transferred from those two categories, the construction contingency and the owner's contingency, to offset additional costs that come about through either design changes or increased costs for some of the areas. And also there are caps put onto some expenses. For example, under FF&E, you saw a budget of 1.6 million, and actually we spent 2.5. That was done through a lot of transfers because there was a per student cap. But the school committee and also the school building committee authorized the use of funds for additional computers, upgrading the fixtures in the rooms, etc. So that's what that column represents, is the revised budget. And as you can see, when we are now finished, the budget was $59.4, still $59.4, but there was a balance left in construction and a balance left in the owner's contingency, over $400,000 in total. The next column is our cost column. Our cost at this point was $58.9 million. So our budget balance between what we originally had, what we still have, which was $59.4, based on our budget revisions and what we submitted already, is we have a budget balance of $560,000. And again, that's not money left in our fund balance. It's strictly a budget balance at this point. And I'll go over what we talk about in the fund balance after. The next column, which is the most important one, is the eligible cost. As I indicated earlier, 51% of our costs 51% of eligible costs would be reimbursed in the way of a grant. So it's up to the MSBA to determine for whatever we submit, either through change orders or budget revisions or expenditures or changes in contracts, as to what they would consider to become an eligible cost. We can spend the money to stay within the total dollar amount that we have for a budget, but they in a sense say that they will return and give us a reimbursement for only what they consider to be eligible. So that column that represents there, 53,345, is basically 90% of our submitted costs were considered eligible, which is a very good program that we had set up. The last column is based on what we now have as our estimated grant. Are there any questions on this page at all? So I'll move on to the sources of funds to tell you how we, in a sense, where we got our money to build the project and stay within this budget. There are several ways of coming up with money for this project. One is called bond anticipation notes. In other words, before you issue a bond, you go out for bond anticipation notes. Well, I'll refer to the whole thing as we call them bands. And the next one is bonds, which means obviously what it is. You bond your district and you bond the towns to pay over a time frame, which was originally estimated to be 30 years, to pay the interest and principal related to that. The other source of funding is, as I said, the grant reimbursement. We received our reimbursement up to 95% of the grant. The way the budget was set up with MSBA is once our expenditures got to a point and they gave us 95% of what they considered an estimated grant to be, every cost from then on was our own. We had to find money in order to do that, to pay the rest of the bills. So we reached our cap in January 30th of 2015. That was $26.4 million we had received from them at that point. Our first request for a grant was submitted in April 2012. Our last one, Rec 51, was submitted on May 16th of 2018. The other grants we received were what we call energy incentives. We had funding from Cape Light Compact and also Colonial Gas to $587,000 worth. The thing with that is, based on the construction project, we were paying our vendor for everything, all the costs related to construction, dealing with HVAC, electrical, all those areas. So they were giving us reimbursement for that. This additional grant meant that we could use this to also offset our cost in those categories. But at the end, in other words, when MSBA says we're going to give you a grant over here, they will deduct from what they considered eligible cost this total of $587,000. In other words, we weren't able to double dip. That's basically what it boils down to. Any questions on that overview there? Otherwise, I'll go into committees. There were three major committees that were set up for this whole project. One, obviously, was the school building committee. They met what I call minimum monthly meetings because there were a number of meetings up front, considerable work that had to be done. They were all attended by the owner's project manager, which was Skanska, the architect, which was Mount Vernon Group, and obviously the Monomoy staff, the superintendent, business manager, myself. Their role was to take care of monitoring the construction schedule, invoice approval, and recommending the approvals to the school committee to pay them, doing a total review of change orders, approving any budget revisions, approving any contract amendments, and constantly at the meetings looking at budget status. The school committee also had a role by approving the payment to vendors and to review and approve all bond anticipation notes and the bond issue. And in a sense as well, get a total overview of what the budget project status looked like, what funding we expected, and what our debt service may end up being. The other committee that we had was called the finance team. That was made up of the town managers, the town finance directors, the Monomoy superintendent, treasurer, and business manager. We had meetings to basically come up with a financing plan based on what our costs were going to be and what our estimate coming in from MSBA was going to be, and to come up with a recommendation to the school committee to decide exactly how best to finance the entire project. So they looked at everything pertaining to the two communities, the tax levy, the current capital and future needs of the towns, the impact on the debt service, the assessments to the towns, because that's what we assess them for the operating budget for the Monomoy Regional School District, and obviously the interest costs. So their main role at that point, after going through all these reviews, was to give a joint recommendation for a financing plan to the school committee. Now I'll deal with the financing transactions, but as I said, I'm only going to cover a couple of key areas, because there's, obviously, we were issuing bans all the way in budgeting everything for several years. The financing plan that was developed was to ban up to a major portion of the estimated cost, which was 80%, and then issue a bond, which I'll cover when we get into debt service. The two key things that the finance team recommended for the budget for the communities as well as the school committee was to bond interest only in the FY15 budget, and then to bond principal and interest starting in the FY16 budget. And mind you, this was done way before we bid a bond at that point in time, but that was the financing plan. And basically, we stuck with that. The band dollars that we were going to be issuing were all based on project costs through the phases of construction. Myself, the OPM, which is your project manager, the architect, as well as the GC, we're constantly doing estimates of both cost, reimbursements at that point in time, what else we needed to fund, 3 to 6 month increments. We did not forecast out beyond that, especially in some areas. Our first ban was issued in February 2012. We issued 12 more bans up through October 17. The interest rate under all of the bans was under 1.5%. Some of them, based on obviously the amount of the ban, were very low, but we never exceeded 1.5. The ban that you're going to be asked to approve at your next meeting in October, on October 11th, is what we call Ban 9. We at this point have an outstanding ban that's due for payment on October 18th and on October 19th. And that's what we call Ban 8. It's for $1.5 million. To emphasize that, we have issued several bans, which we call rollover. In other words, we haven't had to use them to finance any portion of the cost related to the project. And I'll go over that more when we talk about how we consolidated some bans to have some funds available throughout the project. But they roll over, which means Ban 9 that you're going to approve on October 11th will pay Ban 8. We're not using any of those costs, any ban money for anything else at that point. On September 20th, we're sending the bid document to our bond counsel for review and comment. We're going to bid the document on October 3rd, and on October 11th, you will be asked to award the bid. That ban will be paid in October of 19. And there's a couple of things that are important to emphasize when we talk about the issuance of bans or bonds. There are issuance costs related to doing all of those, regardless of the money that we're going out for. The issuance costs, we have to pay bond counsel for their reviews, Standard & Poor's for rating service, the document preparation, every other related cost for going online and posting the bid documents online. So all the bids that we requested through bans or bonds, we wanted a minimum payment to pay our issuance cost. So whenever we issued a ban, if the cost was going to be $5,000, whatever ban number that was, we wanted someone to bid on it, give us a good interest rate, but also to give us extra money. And that's what we call premium in the terminology of doing that. So based on that, the school committee, in authorizing bans and bonds, we had additional premiums that we applied to all of our remaining costs, and those additional premiums were over $820,000 that you received. So that, in a sense, reduced our future borrowing costs. Any questions on that so far? Because I want to get into more of the detail on a couple of these bans and bonds when I deal with the debt service. But for now, I want to talk about the MSBA closeout process. As I indicated earlier, on May 16th, we submitted our final request for reimbursement and all the certification for reimbursement and every required document that MSBA has in a closeout process. We submitted that to MSBA to start their audit. As of July 27th, they had indicated an adjustment in certain areas for the eligible costs. But at that point, based on July 27th, I was using that estimate for what you're going to see down below for an estimate of what our eligible costs would be. They are going to be reviewing the final audit report at their MSBA board meeting on October 31st of 18. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail when I talk about debt service. Now, looking at debt service, again, the financing plan was to bond our project when we hit the 80% of our cost level. What I recommended to the finance team, based on our estimates of cost throughout the whole cycle and looking forward to where we needed to be, I wanted to go out with one band that was going to be used as our basis to secure a bond. And by that I mean, from December 12th to August of 13, I issued bands that totaled $25.1 million. I didn't roll over anything. All the bands that were coming in were being used to finance the project. And I issued all of those with a due date of December 6th of 13. What I wanted to do was to consolidate that and also include additional money to cover our estimated costs through March of 2014. So on December of 13, we issued a $30 million ban. And that paid off those other ones that we had for 25.1 and still gave us 4.9 million for the estimated cost through March of 2014. That ban was earmarked to come due on September of 2014. So do you have any questions in how we approach that process? What I, mainly talking with the finance team, I felt we needed to have a good dollar amount for a ban to be given out, and then use that to, in a sense, come up with a bond. When we met with bond counsel, based on our estimate of where we were at the time, the bond counsel authorized us to go out for 28 million rather than 30 million. Because at that time, I revised our estimate, and even though I went out for a band for 30 million, we weren't going to have to go for a bond for 30. We were going to go for a bond for 28. So we bid that bond in September 14. We had issuance cost of $87,000. We got a bond premium at that point of $2.5 million. The bond premium not only covered the issuance cost, but based on the people that bid on the bond, that was extra money to, in a sense, use. So what the school committee did was take the 28, pay off the band, take the $2 million from the premium, pay off the band. So the whole $30 million band was paid off both with the bond and the premium. And we still had money left over of $485,000 for a net premium. So that carried us forward at that point. Based on our estimate initially and how we revised it, we didn't have to go out for another band for 7 months. because we had enough based on our original 4.9 and this premium. And in fact, that's about the time that we started getting our revenue from the Cape Cod Compact and others. So that $580,000 was, in a sense, at that point in time, assisted us in still continuing to pay our construction costs, buying FF&E, et cetera, even knowing full well that when we get down to the end, they were going to be taking a percentage of that. But that was still, again, a godsend for us from the standpoint of having to go 7 months without having to issue another ban. So that ban at that point was $2 million on April of 15. We submitted bans subsequently to that, but every one of those was a rollover, which is what I just explained to you about Ban A. We didn't need any other bans after this one, and every time we issued another one, it was mainly to pay off the one that we had until we could close out the project. Once we knew we were going to close out the project, we at that point would have some money coming back into us from the state. So at this point, that's what I want to cover now, is Ban 9, which we're going to be issuing. We are going to, in a sense, pay Ban 8 with that. So the $1.5 million that you're going to approve on October 11th is going to be paid, has to be paid off in October of 2019. That is the last ban we are going to issue at any point. There won't be any more bonds, there won't be any more bans. What we planned on doing in a meeting with the finance team, the plan is obviously to use whatever money we have left, and then, in a sense, pay off the ban that we got here, which is Ban 9. Ban 9 will be $1.5 million. We estimated initially in this document that I originally provided to you, 1.1 million coming back from an estimated grant from MSBA. Our building fund balance at this point, after paying everything, was $155,000. So in a sense, we were going to be short about $240,000. So in meeting with the finance team, we are going to be reviewing that based on what our final grant's going to be and how we, in a sense, want to finance part of it in FY20, or how we, in fact, want to handle the $240,000 that we're going to owe. So lo and behold, today, in the afternoon, I got an email from MSBA that gave us our draft audit at this point. So the first thing I did was turn to the page, even though it's a good-sized document. I turned to the page to see what they are coming up with as an estimate for our grant. That's due us. I again had $1,101,025. Their estimate is $1,103,780. So in a sense, we gained $2,000. So it's not a significant amount, but the audit report, the other sections of the audit report that we have to now review and submit our responses to a couple of things. There are only 2 forms that they have questions on that we submitted that Skanska, which is the OPM, and I are going to review next Wednesday to go over exactly what they're asking for based on the fact that we already submitted the information through what we call our sources of funds. And based on submitting those forms, that will not change this dollar amount in any way at all. It's just a matter of them saying that they wanted certain forms for substantial completion of the building and a couple of other forms to be revised. But it has nothing to do with changing the dollar amount. So in effect, the amount that we are actually going to be presenting to the MSBA board on October 31 of 18 is the final grant that we're going to get. So at this point, we will be all finished, and even though we were authorized for $36 million in bonds over a 30-year time frame, the only bond that the districts are going to have is a 80% is a ban for 25 years, which we've now already been paying into it for 3-4 years. So that's the only thing that's been issued with this project. So number one, the project came in, number one, under budget. We still have money left in contingency, still have money left in the budget balance, but we have now completed everything. And the reason I wanted to emphasize the difference between the budget balance and what we have and what we call fund balance, and you cannot borrow any more than what you need in order to pay bills. So every time we did a ban or a bond, we had to make sure we were going to be strictly working with our estimated costs all the way through the project, which we have done. So at this point, we're now in the process of answering the questions to MSBA. There's one form that we have to sign that says, do we agree with the estimate of the grant? And as far as I'm concerned, we do, which means it's going to have to be signed off on by the school committee. And I think the committees that were part of this whole project can be very proud of it, because I think in some of the meetings that we had, we were talking about some other projects on the Cape that were well over budget, not funded well, and yet we did well with this project. So any questions or other comments that you would add?
Karen?
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Don. I kind of think I was like 13 when I first joined this Howard High School Building Needs Committee. And it was either 207, 208, it was a fearless group of about 10 or 11 of us, seated maybe 150 yards to the north from here, with a couple of buckets in what was in the library to prevent. And in those years, there's really only been two people that I bumped into as far as finances and being faithful navigators. One's my wife. We just recently took a trip and got back home and came into the kitchen maybe 3 weeks ago, and she said, "Oh, by the way, Terry, I paid for that island trip." Dawn is the other second person that I can say to myself, he has, you know, I don't have them, but all these cars now are equipped with GPSs. Phones, I guess, are also. Well, Dawn, he was our GPS guy, and his co-pilot was Katie. Each turn of the meeting, where there was a ban or a bond or what needed to be done, it was done so clearly and practically that through this 4 or 5 or 6 year journey ends up being an unsung hero, Don. So I know I said this a couple of years ago when you came before us, but in my former life and career, I was involved in other building committees on public lands for schools, and maybe I learned a little bit more as I got into this project, but I have been so impressed with how this has been a true, not only victory for the kids, but no longer are we 100 yards north of that worrisome building with no place to go. But what a great deal of pride our community has with the end result of this. And beside the contractors and all the folks that made this work, you made those numbers and the project priorities, it worked. So in behalf of all of the citizens that don't really have the time to get involved in this, and as you've said, there are so many projects in Massachusetts and the Cape that have just created headaches for the taxpayers with a less than needed money or a mistake that we're all kind of worried about. This was just a home run. So again, I thank you.
I appreciate your comments, but that's one of the other reasons I wanted to emphasize the committees there. Because as you know, you were a member of that school building committee, and everything that was done was basically the same way. And I know Dave Whitcomb, he always turned around and said Ed McManus as well, the co-chairs of that committee. Every time we had discussions, the first thing he would do is, "Okay, Don, what do you think? What do you want to do? What do you know?" So I understand that. But by the same token, a lot of discussion was there so that everybody understood everything. And obviously, I didn't do that on my own. The votes were there. The votes were taken as to, okay, is this how we're going to work it? This is how we're going to do it? And everybody understood it. And it was a good-sized committee. So you had a lot of town committee people. You had town people in there from the fire department and the planning department and everything. So there was a lot of people involved with that. And I also credit the finance team for all of us, for Katie and I, to be able to meet with them and Scott, to meet with the town managers and the town finance directors, and after a while, it first started off way back, obviously, in 2012, with a little difference, because in a sense, we were Monomoy, and they were still Harwich and Chatham. And then finally, when we got going further, it became everything to deal with Monomoy, because they were gonna be funding it through assessments on their tax base. So it then became, we were good comrades in a sense, and decided to really lay out exactly how we wanted to do it. So we first set the goals, and as I said, that the main one was, how are we gonna get to 15 and 16? And do we wanna put principal and interest in that first year, or do we wanna just put interest in it and then do that? So we made those kinds of decisions, but it was joint recommendations. If you recall, every time I came before you with a ban, and in fact with the bonds, everything was a joint recommendation from that committee. So we met, 2 weeks ago? And I gave them this estimate where I thought we might end up. And so we already discussed the fact, okay, there's several options, and let's take a look at that option when we get the final grant from MSBA. So we already are in the process of saying, okay, what do we have out there for options to take care of this $240,000 that we're going to owe when we come in October 19? So when we get to that point, we're going to be in good shape. Yeah, but again, it was, I'd say that a lot of people that were involved with this did a great job on it. Great job.
Anyone else? Sharon?
Yes, Don, they say the sign of a good leader is someone who doesn't take credit but praises everybody else. So thank you, and I'll be interested in what you have to say next meeting.
Anyone else?
I think just to quickly put things into context, just pulling up a little news thing from back in 2000, June 21, 2012, which is sort of the news media outlets recounting the presentation that was made to the public, where it was estimated that building this high school would cost $65.4 million. And that came in, ultimately there's a project funding agreement that Don has on the sheet here that was going to be a $64.7 million project. As Don brought up, the revised budget was $5.25 million less. So we came in even $5.25 million less than that. And one of the roles that Don has always played is all the invoices for the construction of this flow through Don, and he's doing little assessments on, is the state going to credit us money for this or not credit us that? So in a project that was $59.4 million, Don managed to project costs to, he was only off by $2,700, which I think is an accuracy of like 0.005%, if we could all be that accurate. So he's very modest in what he does, but we owe him a lot of credit for how successful this project's been.
I would just like to add as well, keeping it current to tonight, your presentation of explaining such a complicated process over a number of years and having me really understand it is, I thank you. It was great.
It's my job. Yeah. But the main thing is like Katie and I were talking today, the big thing is that when you look at when it started, where we are, and the debt service that we're continuing to pay now on this bond, that's the only obligation that the communities have is the 28 million, rather than the 36 and rather than anything else. So it all worked out. And I think we were timely with pulling together some of our bands so that we could go out for a good bond for 28. The bond council was a little nervous when I told them initially. In fact, Scott was in that meeting and Katie was, and our finance people from the bank were in that meeting too. And because my issue was, I needed the $30 million because he needed to pay that ban. But in my back pocket, I did have money that I could have used additional money right away, going out for an additional ban right away for $2 million if I didn't get a premium. So when the bond counsel and I talked about it, he said, let's wait and see, because right now the market is pretty good. And so I'll authorize the $28 million as long as you know that you can come back in, if you get 28 only and no premium, that you have money in order to pay your 30 million ban. And I said, yes, I do. I'm all set. So he said, okay, and go out for 28, which we did. So that's how we're ending up with that. And again, that's why the bond counsel is going to be looking at this ban, but as he said, right now, it's a rollover. He said, I don't even have to really review all the details anymore, because all you're doing is paying the other one off. So we're in good shape, and I'm glad I was part of it, so, yeah.
We are
It's been a long road, but, you know, I came on in May of 11, and at the time, I was strictly there depending on the feasibility study. If the feasibility study didn't come through and you didn't become Monomoy, then obviously I wasn't going to be around as treasurer. So, so that's how it ended up.
Madam Chair, just a postscript. One last thing I forgot along this little journey we all took. All this 21 members and the subcommittees, there wasn't, despite the fact that we've heard that sometimes inviting pressure into life, it's a privilege. And it was, because along the way, we all in that committee had a lot of fun. And out of that fun, a lot of friendships developed. And that's another, Sharon alluded to elements of leadership, that's another symptom as to how an effective thing takes place. When people walk away from their task and said, I had fun doing this, and I met a couple of people on the way that are friends. So, good journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Well, hard act to follow, but we have the Strategic Planning Focus Group, Steering Committee, and Strategic Plan Timeline.
So in your packets is a sort of a compilation of a number of different emails that I've sent you, or that you've gotten over the last several weeks. I think since we last met, I had a meeting with Sharon, Joy Jordan, Patty Bernier, Patty Dean, the person that we've discussed having as our facilitator for the event. So what you have is a flyer that is inviting the public to event here in the high school library, Saturday, September 29th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. With lunch served. The second page is an example of a letter that has gone out, and I believe in your packets you actually have your formal letter with, on letterhead, inviting each of you individually to be part of that focus group. But that same letter has gone out to every individual on the next, I think, 6 pages. So I think there's about 219 different individuals that this was sent out to. We've received a number back already. On Friday, we will start calling them, because we also have phone numbers attached to each of these names, so we can call to just follow up if we haven't heard back one way or the other from them. After the list that went out, we also have the draft agenda. The objective would be to secure broad-based community input to develop the next iteration of a strategic plan for the improvement of teaching and learning for all students within the Monomoy Regional Schools. What we see as a tentative agenda for the day is we'd have our chair welcome them to the day. I would spend a few minutes talking with folks about the purpose of the day and the process that we'll be going through, or at least sort of the timeline for the day. Each of the building principals will share, we'll call it more of an abridged version of presentations that they've given to you. So there'll be sort of roughly 12 minutes and done that will share some of the highlights in terms of how learning and teaching and other issues, if it's at Harwich Elementary School. I'm sure Mary will have something about the PBIS, the Positive Behavioral Program that is going on there. So I'm sure that there'll be a little blurb on social emotional learning and things like that. So there'll be a little reporting happening from each of the building principals talking about the successes that they've had over the last several years since the last strategic plan and since the districts come together, and what they see as some of the challenges. And I'll do a quick overview from sort of the district perspective, keeping in mind that some individuals who will be coming may have last been involved with the schools when it comes to a regionalization vote. So we want to share where we've come since that vote and some of the challenges we have. After that, there's a section we refer to as engaging in audacious thinking. Conversations that the four of us were having was just sort of an acknowledgement that that the kindergartners today in our schools are going to graduate in 2031, and how will the world change in that amount of time? I penned something that I've put in the packet here. I also have it on the district's website, just my own sort of reflection on things that have changed in a short period of time. And I sort of focus it around what's become near and dear to me is my iPhone, but in 12 years ago, iPhones didn't exist. And
Excuse me, Scott, will that video be shown at this meeting?
So that's the plan, is to have that
Good.
showing of what I think it's called Do You Know 2028.
Yeah.
But that sort of vision of what the future holds, and to spend some time talking about the future and should the schools change. If I think back, at what high school was like for me, or what elementary school was like for me, it starts to think, what fundamentally should be changing, and how the education should look like for that set of kindergartners as they're coming through, knowing what sort of high-tech, fast-paced, future awaits them. So we have a section that we just sort of refer to as audacious visioning, and thinking about what that future should be. And then we'll spend time, quote unquote, breaking bread, going to lunch, and we have some discussion questions that we'll encourage people to think about over lunch. We'll come back and we'll go through a little bit of a round robin, trying to get people to work with different people on 4 different questions. So we'll break, however big the group is, down into groups of roughly 8 to 10 people to do small group discussions where we're getting the feedback from each of these smaller groups that can kind of feedback, so that we can hear capture all the voices in the room and allow everybody a chance to talk, given that it could be a large group. After that, the 4 discussion questions that we'll have them go through, we'll have time to allow people to start identifying what are the things, when it comes to each one of those discussion questions, that really resonated most for them, so that we can not only get individual feedback, but see how each point really resonated with the group. We'll spend a brief time as we close out. I'll share sort of next steps in the process. I'll invite Joy to go encourage people to keep involved with the schools, and she can talk about what other opportunities there will be, and then we'll do a little closing and send people off. But the discussion questions that we drafted are in the packet for you to look at if you wish. And the feedback from that day, we envision not you know, let's say there's 100 people show up, it's, you know, not writing a strategic plan with 100 people, but to have us distill it down into a strategic planning steering committee that can take that feedback and make headway with it. So the last page on what I've provided you is just sort of a grid on different school districts that have strategic plans. If you Google search strategic plan in a Massachusetts school district, you know, here's 10 or so that'll pop up that have, you know, that list what the composition of their steering committee is. You know, those steering committees went from a high of 40 people and a low of 10. I think 40 is probably a bit unwieldy to try to draft a document with. You know, I've suggested 16 that would have, you know, central office administrators, building level administrators, a community representative, a student representative, parents at each level in the district. And my suggestion is that we have a couple school committee members on that, you know, hopefully, you know, we can have enough of that group of 16 together for a long enough period of time to make headway, ideally during the month of October, so that in my ideal world we're able to come back to this group for the last meeting in October, if not in November, with a draft of that next plan. So that's the packet, sort of summary of the conversations over the last several weeks.
This sounds really good. I just think that from the limited experience I've had with that, it would be better to have more people involved with that at each of these levels going forward. So you'd feel like the group, because we've got, what is this, 200 people or something?
We've invited 200.
And plus every teacher you invited opening day, so I don't know how many that would be. But at any rate, this is a very small number to carry that forward, to represent that group. That's just my opinion.
How do you want to go forward as far as getting representatives from this committee? A couple have spoken to me about that.
I think at the end of the day, it's up to the committee as to if they're volunteers, fine. I think you can choose to. I suspect as chair you could delegate, or
do we nominate or delegate?
Nominate and vote. At the end of the day, I'd say that's your call.
I would echo that. I think the chair should, if the number is 3 or 4 or 2 or whatever the number is, to contact those persons and invite them to represent us.
Okay.
I would just recommend that anyone that wanted to from this group be invited.
Yeah, but I want to make sure that we do have proper representation. Anyone can certainly be on, but just to make sure we have maybe the 2. So
At least the 2.
at least 2. So, yes.
I have a question. Sharon,
Yeah.
Sure.
is it in the preparation, the writing of the document, you said you feel there should be more people? I couldn't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, the one that I've spoken about,
Right.
we had people, everyone that wanted to go on, worked on it for a year period. And so there was probably, I don't know if there were 200 people, say there were 200 people. There were 50 people that volunteered to go on, and every one of those that volunteered went on. And then at the end, when it was done, those people were the representative of that 200. They invited all the 200 back, and those people that were their representatives went and told them, showed what was going on.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think maybe to nominate at least 2 people. If more want to go, then, so as chair, Joanne and Joe had expressed interest, and I would nominate the two of them to be the street, yeah,
I would like to.
okay, more the merrier. And so, is there a second, or well, if that works?
If that's a motion, I'll
Yeah.
move to second those names and bless them.
You're supposed to tell me. Is that your motion, Donna?
Oh, no,
Yes,
I've
that
done
was
that
the
before.
motion, to nominate,
To nominate Joanne and Joe?
yeah,
Okay.
and Sharon.
And me.
To nominate all three?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, opposed.
And then,
Okay,
Oh,
now,
Thank you.
okay, I think we're ready then for the school committee goal process, and I think I will defer to Jackie to just get us started on this discussion.
it's just that time of year again, and we need to start working on the superintendent's evaluation and have him prepare his goals, and we need to set a timeline that works for the committee and the subcommittee, and as well as Dr. Carpenter. At this point, Dr. Carpenter, do you have, I don't have it in front of me because I don't have my large folder with me tonight, but when we proposed the goals last year?
I think my plan is to have my proposed goals for this group for next school committee meeting.
Next school
To have,
Okay.
have between now and then, us pull together the superintendent evaluation subcommittee
Yes.
to go over those goals.
Because I'm not on,
But
I don't think we haven't had a meeting yet this year with the superintendent's subcommittee yet. Do we have a new member on the subcommittee this year that wasn't on it prior?
get Terry, Jackie, Joanne, and Sharon on the superintendent evaluation.
Okay, perfect. So the subcommittee will set a time to meet with the superintendent and review the goals before the next school committee meeting.
And then I think in terms of dovetailing together, I think if we're looking out after that conversation, and I would say even, maybe as, perhaps just before the strategic planning focus group day, it might be useful to have the committee itself have some sort of workshop time as a body to look at what the goals are.
School committee
for,
goals.
For this group. And I can imagine, I can imagine in many ways they've always been complementary goals. I think just as, one of my clear goals is wanting to see us move forward a strategic plan. I think the same way that this strategic plan focus group day is very much a collaboration. I think that I would imagine is a goal that we mutually share. But I think it would be good to probably have the group come together to parse out what your goals are going to be as well.
So you want us to do school committee goals before the strategic plan?
I think it could be, I just think it doesn't necessarily need to be before. I think just, let's say, before the end of the month, it's just this days at the end of the month, it's not.
So before the strategic plan?
Yeah, so.
Which is at the end of the month.
Or maybe we look at the next school committee day as having half of it might be our traditional open session and half is a workshop, but I think that would be sort of productive use of time for the group.
Madam Chair, I think we all have copies of this year's school committee goals that we should be able to reflect back on before we
Okay.
come.
Oh.
Now, personally, I have lost my copies.
I think mine are with
So
yours.
I would
You
ask
started
that
to scare me, and then you threw yourself under the bus.
It's much less painful if you do that. Thank you very much,
Leah?
Assistant to the Chair. Then if we met with Scott the next week or 10 days for a review of his goals, the subcommittee,
Yeah.
I think we then could schedule a workshop on our next meeting, and that would give us a chance to digest his vision and at the same time get a chance to take a look at what we've done as a committee this past year and how close we came to accomplishing some of those. I'm sure some were multi-year.
Okay. Good suggestion.
So, I have a question. Are we talking about then waiting till after the strategic plan is like,
The 29th?
the 29th is like 2 days after our next school committee meeting? The one following that would be October 11th. So are we talking about October 11th having the two things separate where we'd have all the information?
I think we were talking about the September 27th, having part of that meeting be a constructive
Goal setting.
workshop about the school committee goals.
I would
So that it's
personally,
prior to the strategic plan.
I would prefer to wait because this whole process might reveal some things that we might not think about.
But on that point, which is a good one, the final draft of it may not come to our view by early November, end of October. So we'd be waiting for the larger group and then a couple of meetings of the smaller group. So my thought would be, let's try to get ourselves onward, and then if something would be generated that we, in a vision, forgot, we can always add to and subtract something after the process is over. But I think I'd be in favor of getting on with it on the 27th for an hour and a half.
Okay, I agree. Do we need to, can we just do that, or do we need to vote on it, or can we just
I don't
meet?
think we need to vote on it. I think just at our agenda meeting, we incorporate the workshop into our meeting schedule for the 27th, for the school committee goals.
So like at 4:30 or 5 o'clock or something?
Yeah, before or after, whatever the group.
Yeah, is there, anyone have a preference? I want to be with you, Joey.
You're gonna meet me halfway?
I prefer after, but,
Okay. Doesn't matter to me. After?
or 5 o'clock's fine too.
I'd
Just
prefer
throwing it out there.
afterwards.
After? Joe,
Throwing.
Just have a
have a
late.
preference? All right,
Show's open.
okay. After, then we'll meet after the meeting to discuss the goals. Okay.
And as an add-on, I'd suggest the superintendent and the chair take a hard look at the agenda items so that it might be a quicker meeting. So afterwards, I glaze over.
Count on it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Subcommittee reports, are there any? Don't all,
Yes, the superintendent evaluation subcommittee will be planning a meeting to discuss the superintendent's goals.
Thank you. Superintendent's report.
I would like to give credit where credit is due. For the past 5 years, I think my first few weeks and Katie's and the central office it has been fielding calls about buses. And I'd like to compliment Cape Destinations that this year has been a much improved busing start of the year. So we've, we still have some buses that, that are, that we need to kind of fine tune some routes so that they get there on time. But they're, it's not like we're seeing buses showing up 10, 20 minutes late. And we are not one of those school districts that had news, articles about, about their busing. So it was just, it's been a very smooth opening to the school year, and I greatly appreciate that. And I appreciate the patience that I know some families have had as we've worked on the fine tuning. I know that some of you came to the opening remarks for the teachers' first day back to work. One of the things that I focused on in my remarks was just some insights from a summer week that I spent with Melissa McGuire and Mark Smith on social emotional learning, and you know, just shared with our staff just ways that we might better promote positive mindsets to engage and motivate students and support their resilience. And I know that I shared my little PowerPoint deck with the school committee. I'd also like to thank Officer John Mitchell of the Harwich Police Department, who came and gave the entire staff, including custodians and cafeteria workers and teaching assistants and office staff and teachers and administrators a refresher on Run, Fight, Hike. You know, this is the protocol that we use as sort of an enhanced lockdown, where you're while we use the word lockdown, it's the first move is not to lock your doors, but to assess the situation, and if getting out of the building is possible, to do that. And I thought Officer Mitchell did an outstanding job of sharing that information. And I acknowledged at the meeting, it's something that raises anxiety, but I also think it's really important to start off with conversations that focus on safety. I'd like to thank Sarah Wheaton and Rachel Barnes for the high school summer reading book groups that they facilitated. I had fun with about 20 high school students this afternoon discussing the first book in the Game of Thrones series, and greatly appreciate the few students that actually made it through all 800 some odd pages of the book. Last thing I just want to share, at our next meeting we'll come closer and closer to the proverbial October 1 numbers that we have. It's that new year. We've already got an invitation to come speak before the selectmen and Harwich, and we've got budget meeting in Chatham. So we've got it's that the new fiscal year is, or planning for next fiscal year is already started. One of those first things is we have the October 1 enrollment numbers. So I had Leah just do a quick assessment on where we are based on the number of kids that are showing up. But we see Chatham Elementary School being down a little bit by just about a dozen kids, but that's what we anticipate as we shrink from it was 2 kindergarten sections last year, now it's 2 first grade sections and 2 kindergarten sections. So we're seeing us shrinking by about 13 students each year at Chatham Elementary. On the other side of the district, Harwich Elementary has grown almost by as many students. We see Harwich Elementary up. The middle school is up a bit. The middle school looks to be up about 8 students, and the high school, we're seeing the bubble is starting to get closer to the high school. Remember, our biggest cohort of students is now sitting at 6th grade in the district. So we're seeing the high school numbers starting to rise. So the high school is up by 28 students this year. So this building that was built for 700 is at 647 at the moment. So we're up about 32 students in the district overall this year. That would be my report.
Great report.
Thank you. Okay, the action items, the prior year invoice, which was in our folder for Open Cape. Need a motion for that?
I move to approve the Open Cape invoice for the balance due of $24.85 paid to Open Cape Corporation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And secondly, Caroline Freitas stipend.
I move to improve the stipend due to Caroline Freitas as the District Wellness Department Head for K through 12 for FY18. The stipend is in the amount of $4,103 and will be from the FY19 budget.
Second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Don't we do a